Hey guys, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about some of what you will and will not learn in a college estimating course, and also what you can do to prepare for a role in pre-construction and estimating after college. And so the reason I wanted to give this presentation is because I've taken two courses, one as an undergraduate student getting my construction management degree, and another as a master's student getting my engineering degree. Um, I've noticed some similarities between the two courses, which were two different universities, and also similarities between other recent graduates coming into the industry that I'm working with, and what they do know and what they don't know. So let's get into this. And before I get any further, I just want to be clear, this isn't meant to be slanderous towards college estimating courses. Um, it's important to note that a typical semester is anywhere from 12 to 18 weeks long. That feels like a lot of weeks, but realistically, it's only 3 or 4 months. It's not a lot of time to learn estimating, and it's certainly not a lot of time to completely be ready to take on a role as an estimator if you're just starting out. And so, what do estimating courses focus on? Well, they try to focus on the basics. Um, the challenge with that is who defines what the basics are. Um, Estimating is a fairly unstandardized world, and so what might feel like the basics to one professor or one college might be different to another. That being said, if you do take a college estimating course, which I'm not opposed to, I think they're fairly good. What you'll really learn is the basics of how to read drawings, how to perform pretty basic takeoff, and then just kind of the general nuts and bolts of estimating CSA trades, which is civil, structural, architectural, and so you'll talk a lot about earthwork and concrete, maybe framing, maybe drywall, maybe paint. You probably won't cover anything mechanical, electrical, or plumbing. If you do, let me know in the comments. I'd be really interested to see which programs are teaching MEP estimating. Um, but for the most part, that's what you'll cover. It's going to be 3 to 4 months of really just kind of an introduction to estimating. So that's what you'll learn in a college estimating course. So I've labeled this next slide what may be missed. What I mean by that is if you're just starting in estimating, if you would like to enter the workforce kind of a bit more prepared, I would say on top of what you're learning in college, here's what you can kind of learn on the side on your own to be a little bit more prepared. And so let's just go down these. The first one is learning the difference between pre-construction and estimating. I think most colleges that teach an estimating course very intentionally call it Intro to Estimating or Construction Estimating, and not a lot of them will call it pre-construction, and that's because there's so much more to cover with pre-construction versus estimating. Just kind of as a recap, estimating is a part of pre-construction, um, but there's so many other facets to it, which kind of include subcontractor management, um, strategy, handover, um, things like that, identifying bid packages um, and preventing it against liabilities. Um, the next thing you want to learn is bidding strategy. That's more of an art than a science, and it really depends on the team that you're working with, the company that you're working for. Um, but learning how to develop a strategy once you receive a set of bidding documents will be key for you in your career as an estimator and going into the future into a pre-con manager or a director. So that's something to keep in mind. Something I've noticed, which is really interesting, is that a lot of estimating courses don't um, they'll kind of talk about how to do a takeoff, and maybe they'll talk about the different types of takeoffs. And so the three basic types are like a kind of like a cost per square foot or a conceptual takeoff, an assembly takeoff, and a detailed takeoff. And I've made other videos covering those topics. But what a lot of my courses haven't covered is when to use which type of takeoff. And so, for example, if I'm building a very complicated concrete structure, and it has a fairly simple mechanical system, and it's pretty light on the architectural finishes. Um, let's say a parking garage. I'm my takeoff is going to get super detailed on the concrete because that's where most of my money is, and it's probably not gonna I'm probably not gonna put as much effort into the mechanical system or those architectural finishes. Um, and that's something that's super important as an estimator is knowing when to do which type of takeoff. The other thing that you'll want to learn is subcontractor management. So reaching out to subcontractors, um, helping them understand what information is given in the drawings, what they need to work towards, what the due date is for their bid, and also learning how to answer RFIs or requests for information. A lot of programs will go into kind of the nuts and bolts of estimating, but not a lot of them, I feel like, cover new technologies, new software. Um, I've yet to take an estimating class in college that covers BIM or at least has an entire module on BIM. I think both of them covered a little bit of BIM, just kind of explaining what it is, but we certainly didn't open any software. And so, depending on what you're doing with your current role, you may use BIM, you may not. I predict in the next 20 years, um, everyone's going to use BIM. It's certainly gaining popularity now, and I don't think it's going to slow down. And the last thing is different delivery methods. And so learning how to estimate a design build project where there's very little information versus a CMGC versus a hard bid, sometimes called a design bid build. Um, Depending on the delivery method is going to affect how you estimate a project. And so these are what I recommend if you're looking to get a job in estimating, you're taking an estimating class. These are kind of some of the things to watch out for and learn on your own. Um, Now, that being said, I did mention I'm an advocate for most college estimating courses. I think they do a good job at teaching the basics. Um, but you and I know it's easy to gloss over it and skip through class without necessarily getting a ton out of it if you really want to. Um, as the old adage goes, C's get degrees, and if you're really not interested, you're probably not going to get as much out of the class. My prediction is that there's much more available to you than what you can generally receive out of the class, especially if there's a textbook. And so my recommendations, if you want to get a lot out of your estimating course, the first one would be to read the textbook. If you have handouts, read those as well. Um, I've read a lot of estimating textbooks in the past 8 or 10 years. Um, Most of them are pretty good, and there's a lot of information. At the very least, if one has incorrect information, hopefully you can kind of build up the background to identify something that's incorrect and kind of challenge it. And that's a really good attribute as an estimator to develop anyway. Um, but as you're reading the textbook, as you're reading handouts, an exercise I always enjoyed doing was to see the material from the perspective of an owner and then a general contractor and then a subcontractor, because all three of those parties will generally estimate a project, and they're going to take a completely different approach on how to estimate that project, even if the entire design is completely is the same. Um, the other thing to do going through an estimating course is to think through the process. And so if you're learning how to do takeoff, um, and maybe you don't have an assignment to organize your takeoff after you've done it, maybe you're just supposed to measure stuff. Um, Kind of think through and ask yourself, how would I organize the information in this takeoff? This is a crucial thing to learn if you're going into estimating. I would say even project management. When I was a project engineer, having a pre-con background, obviously, they would kind of put me in charge of doing takeoffs for change orders and things like that. And so if you are going into pre-construction or even operations, I would say learning how to do a takeoff and then organize that information to make it digestible and easy to understand for other people is key. That's a great place to start. And then the same thing for an estimate. The more you can organize your takeoffs and your estimates, or the better organized they can be, the further ahead you're going to get in the future. And then the last thing is means and methods. And so as you're learning about steel estimating, as you're learning about concrete estimating, as you're learning about earthwork estimating, um, try to think through the process. Think, okay, how um, I've got a 10-foot deep, 20,000 square foot excavation. How would I excavate this? If I could handpick the equipment, if I could choose crews, if I could select whether to slope it or to shore it or to bench my sides. how would I do it and why? You may not have time to put this all out on paper, but as you're going through these items, it's really good to think, okay, how would I put this together and how would I show that on an estimate? And so, kind of leaning into that, if you are interested in a career in estimating, which I've always been a huge advocate for, I've been in estimating for about 7 years now, and it's been awesome. Um, where do you start? Well, and what can you do to kind of be ahead as you get into the industry? Um, and here's kind of some of the basic skills to learn. I would say the first one is knowing where to start when you get a new project. And so, kind of what you can do as an estimator, or what you can learn how to do is when you get a set of drawings, kind of practice, reading through drawings, reading through specs, um, and then building a strategy on how to execute an estimate. This is a skill that other people will notice very quickly if you can learn how to develop it. Um, this will make or break you as an estimator, especially if you're looking for a promotion going into pre-con manager. Um, it is all about the strategy. Next thing I would say is learn how to do takeoff. And so hopefully you work for a company. If you're doing lots of takeoff, you have a takeoff software. A lot of people more and more today are using Bluebeam, which I could be wrong. It may not have been intentionally designed as an estimating or as a takeoff software, um, but a lot of people use it. I use Bluebeam sometimes. I really enjoy it as a takeoff software. Um, there's other programs out there as well. PlanSwift, on-screen takeoff I've used. Autodesk has an interesting software. Um, what's important to know is how to build a good takeoff, how to make it look organized, and also how to complete a takeoff quickly, um, and also to kind of set a set of standards for yourself. And so something I always like to do, every sheet that I'm building a takeoff on, I will set my scale, and then I'll check the scale. I'll draw a dimension somewhere. Um, and so whenever somebody reviews my takeoff, they always know that my quantities are accurate because they can see that I've got that red line, which shows that I've checked my scale. And then the third basic skill for estimating, obviously, is estimating. And so, kind of mastering the basic equation, quantities times price equals your total cost. Um, learning how to format that. Also, if you're using an estimating software, get proficient at that. Do trainings on the side if you can. The faster you can learn how to build an estimate, especially in a software, the better it's going to work out for you. Um, and the concept that you want to master is to build an estimate that's good enough for anybody to kind of go through and review it and potentially pick it apart, and for you to be able to justify all of your quantities and all of your costs. So the remaining basic skills I would suggest if you want to get good at estimating, um, get really good at Microsoft Excel, also Word and PDF viewers. I mentioned Bluebeam before as a takeoff software. I really enjoy Bluebeam as a PDF reader. Same with Adobe Acrobat. I think it's pretty good. But learn how to use Excel. Learn all the functions. Learn the hotkeys. Something I've done recently was taking courses through the Corporate Finance Institute (CFI). Finance is close enough to estimating where it ended up working out, and I feel like I got a lot out of it. There's other programs as well. I believe there are training courses for estimators. But get good at Excel, learn how to use it well. That's a skill I think that'll never go away, at least not anytime soon. And then same with Word. A lot of what you learn in class, you may not realize that you're going to be writing a lot of documents, especially as a general contractor, especially as a subcontractor. Um, your written and communication skills are going to be important, but also putting them out on a document that looks really good is going to be crucial. Um, learn a basic understanding of finance, accounting, and economics. All three of those are different. I would challenge you to learn the difference between each of those. Um, and and the reason that I'm suggesting this is because if you understand finance, you'll understand how to add cost to your estimate, um, kind of accruals of uh, cost variations and escalations, especially if you're working on a multi-year project. Accounting, the biggest thing here is learning how to lay out your estimate and also preparing for taxes. As an estimator, you won't be doing any financial reporting yourself, but you certainly want to account for any potential taxes that you have to worry about. And then economics. I mentioned escalations before. That kind of goes between finance and economics. Um, but again, if you have a project that's, you know, 3 or 4 years into the future and it lasts a couple of years, um, that's really good to know. Also, if you are looking at unit rates or previous projects that are years past and you want to kind of bring it up cost-wise to what it would be today, or projected into the future, learning economics is going to be helpful. Um, this goes into the basics. It'll be a lifelong pursuit, but understanding the construction process. It's really hard to estimate a project if you don't know how it's going to come together. Um, that sounds basic, but it's just true. That's why so many people recommend getting field experience before you go into pre-construction, or yeah, pre-construction. And that kind of goes into our last few points here. Thinking through a project, same thing. You want to be able to build the project in your head and then lay it out on paper and have it make sense. Learning how to schedule, even a preliminary schedule. If you can learn how to use P6 and you're encouraged to, or Microsoft Project, awesome. Those are great technologies to learn. Um, my last few schedules have been super, super basic. They're crucial, but basic, and I've just done them in Excel. But the idea is that you want to know how long a project is going to last so that you can build a better cost for it. And then we talked about communication skills. You're going to be on calls constantly with owners and subcontractors or general contractors, and other teammates. And you want to learn how to communicate, both through good written skills as well as oral skills. I recommend taking additional courses if you can. Build a habit of reading. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything educational. I read a lot for fun. I also do read a lot of educational books. Um, but learning how to communicate effectively with other people will be a skill that'll help you in the long run. So once you've built those basic estimating skills, and hopefully you've learned some of these in your estimating course, or you will, but those are some to keep in mind. Once you feel like you've got a good handle on those, what do you do next? How do you take it to the next level? Um, so the first thing you're going to want to learn how to do is anticipate owner and general contractor needs. So if I'm an estimator for a top general contractor, huge company, and I'm building a project for a very unique owner that has their own specific requirements. Um, Before I build my estimate, I kind of want to write down what does the owner specifically care about. We're taught in our estimating classes that low bid wins, and that is sometimes the case. But as you get into bigger and larger projects, bigger and larger GCs and owners, sometimes the owner cares a lot more about quality or schedule than price. Maybe the owner will care a lot about price, but maybe the project just has to be built super quickly. Maybe it's an emergency roadway construction project or emergency spillway construction project. Maybe it's a data center where the cost is important, but so is the schedule. And then also, what does your boss care about? So I'll give an example. I had a boss previously that really, really, really cared about formatting. He wanted a certain number of decimals after each number. He wanted my numbers positioned a certain way in each cell on my spreadsheet. He wanted certain colors and certain formulas. Um, Once I was able to put those down, my reviews went way better, even though my costs didn't necessarily change. My strategy for estimating didn't necessarily change, but I learned what he cared about, and that helped me a ton. And then also, what do your subcontractors care about? This is important, and especially as a GC, because you're going to get requests for information, RFIs from your subcontractors, and the more you can anticipate their needs, the less time you have to spend kind of scrambling when they ask you a question. And so everyone that you work with, learn to anticipate their needs. The second thing is learning to read between the lines. This might come a bit more with experience. If you have an engineering background or a design background, this will also help. Um, but learn to read drawings and identify what are the drawings not telling me. Meaning, maybe there's a section missing in the drawings. Maybe there's you've got concrete walls and they just seem kind of thin. You get a feeling that there's going to be thick and shear walls, things like that. Learn to anticipate what the drawings are not telling you, and sometimes you have to guess. and you want it to be a good, educated guess if you have to. Same thing with design and construction. Um, sometimes you get like an SD or a DD set of drawings, um, and because of conversations that are going on, something might change in the future. You want to learn to anticipate that, and then also what's incorrect in the drawings. This comes down to those analytical skills, but you want to make sure that everything comes together in the drawings. And so if you're building an office building and there are 20 columns on the first floor, you kind of want to make sure that there's 20 columns on the second floor and 20 columns on the third floor. Or as each floor rises, it's less and less columns, hopefully, and not more and more. And if there are, then that's the question you want to ask the engineer. Uh, what are the priority items is another crucial piece. Maybe you're building an estimate where a really specific part of the project the owner cares way more about than the other. And so, for example, back to data centers, if there's specialty electrical equipment, the owner kind of wants to know the price before the estimate's complete. Um, you should know to build the estimate for those items first, and then build the overall estimate later. Managing subcontractors and managing liability and risk. We talked about managing subcontractors. Learn to anticipate their needs. Learn to be a friend as you are communicating with them, and not someone that's an adversary. Um, if you're a contractor, especially one that doesn't self-perform a lot, you really need a good relationship with your subcontractors. That is crucial. Nothing will kill a project faster than a bad relationship with subcontractors. And then liability and risk management. This is a tough concept to master, but essentially, as you learn to read contracts, as you learn to read and write clarifications and assumptions, it's going to become crucial to learn how to anticipate items that are maybe riskier. So let's say that you're building a project and it doesn't have a good geotech report, and it doesn't have a good, you don't have any sort of information on what's beneath the ground, but it's a really wet area. Let's say you're building in Oregon, and it's an area that rains a lot. You're going to want to put a clarification that your estimate does not include dewatering, or that you've given an allowance for X dollars for dewatering. But if you just completely miss it, you might be on the hook for that cost later on. And then my final advice is always ask questions. I had a mentor at one point. um, he told me when I was an intern, and I ended up moving to a different company before I got to that point. But he told me when I was a young intern, um, whenever I have interns, I generally don't hire them to estimators unless they ask me a lot of good questions as interns. And so that being said, if you are an intern or a new graduate, maybe you're just a student, ask questions. If you're going to school, especially studying construction management, maybe your fellow students are also working in the construction industry. Get a feel for what their life is like, and the types of projects that they're working on, and the types of challenges they're working on. Um, Coworkers are kind of the same thing, and then also your boss and your mentor. Don't ask questions just for the sake of asking questions, but um, a quick way to get an answer is to ask a question. It's also a good way to show that you're engaged. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you so much.